Hey guys, it's Matthew here once again, and seizure warning and bright lights and all that, so tune out if you're susceptible to all that. Today I got a video about a build I've been kind of thinking about for a bit, and that is Flicker Cast on Crit Discharge. So we've all played a bit of the old Cast on Crit Discharge in the past, and Flicker Discharge has been a bit of a white whale as to like the dumb concept that shouldn't work but can kind of work at this point. And I just thought there was enough items and stuff in game that it should be doable at this point, and at least give it a shot just to see what it looks like for mapping and stuff. The big challenge is of course fixing the charge generation to exist while doing your mapping, but then especially while doing bossing. So I tried to come up with this build just by mostly using a precursor ring for a bit of frenzy extra generation, but then just stacking all kinds of extra generations so that you're essentially never running out of charges, and that's going for both your flicker and for your discharge. And as you can see at this stage, it's actually working out pretty well. So the character has gone pretty much further than I anticipated it would, and the flickers are pretty constant, and discharge is doing pretty big damage, and it's very sustainable. Even on some bosses, haven't done like any real end game or anything, but we can actually sustain flickers, and it's working out as well as, or better than I would have hoped, to be honest. And then especially once you can see you pick up some shrines with the new shrine nodes on the Atlas passive tree, it becomes basically like one of the most juicier sort of headhunter style gameplays where you just go full Super Saiyan. And with a lot of these maps that I'm running that have like double beyond and your sextants and all that, the juicier the map, the better our output becomes, because then Flicker really has a lot that it can chain to, and a lot that it can just keep sustaining on, and it gets pretty crazy. Beyond bosses start just like dying in one shot, and the area on this bitch, once you've got like 20 charges going off, seems to be pretty good, even though I've got no area scaling whatsoever in the build or on the tree. It's also the first time I've decided to use Trickster in a good long while, and there's no huge reason for it. Just +1 frenzy, +1 power charge, and then a bit of fine tuning on the rest of the ascendancy, you know, a bit of mana sustain, which does help out to some extent, and as well as that, got some life and energy shield on kill, so we've decided to build into a bit of a hybrid setup. And yeah, that's basically it for Trickster. But it's worth it enough to play it in this scenario. So the build does revolve around having Flicker attached to Cast on Crit, and then some sort of skill that helps generate charges. And as you can see, a lot of the time right now it is Eye of Winter, but I was playing around with Stormbrand in the setup because that will help basically whatever I want in my Cast on Crit setup to generate lots of frenzies on hit or power charges on crit. And Stormbrand I can self-cast during just various situations, so I'm trying to keep that off of the Cast on Crit setup, and then using something like Eye of Winter or Ball Lightning or Firestorm, something like that for the actual main setup, so that helps generate a lot of charges. And then the discharge itself is in a Cospriest, so it's proccing hopefully every 0.25 seconds, since with the threshold jewel you can take the cooldown of discharge down to 0.25, and with good enough charge sustain and the helmet chant, as you can see, you can just constantly pop off your discharge. There is one other interaction though that apparently is intended but is quite a bit different to the way that the Cast on Crit is, and that is the trigger setup, trigger craft from your betrayal bench. And essentially you can have a socket skills trigger on other skills craft, and it has like an 8-second cooldown, right? But if you have the threshold jewel for discharge, that cooldown goes down to 0.25, and that means you can have a different weapon entirely instead of a Cospriest, and it'll trigger your discharge every 0.25 seconds. Without the need for Cast on Critting. It does change this entire thing a bit though, because all of a sudden you are taking off your charges upon every single skill, not just critting with your skill. So it's not really viable for mapping, and especially not for Flicker Strike, but it is possibly going to be our end game single target. But as I was saying, basically, if it triggers off every skill every single time you are whirling blades or dash or throw down a Stormbrand or some shit, you are expunging all of your charges, and that means that once you then connect with a mob finally, you don't have charges going anymore. So it's not really viable with this Flicker setup, but if you're going pure Cyclone or some shit, it would work out, and for single target, it may be the play. So anyway, let me show you how I built the character so far. There's my current character, level 89, Flicktado II. I did attempt to cast on crit Flicker Strike like a year or two ago, maybe a couple years ago. It's just a real sort of dumb concept, and it was called Flicktado, and didn't really go too far, but this one I think is going as far as it can anyway. Level 89, Trickster. So about 4,500 life, 2,000 energy shield, bit of a hybrid setup. I was kind of wanting to go more low life, but it is really hard to fit a lot of the things you want into this build, because as you can see, the passive tree is a bit all the fuck over the place, because I really need this mark generation over here, and I need, you know, as many charges as I can get across the entire tree. So still finishing these nodes over here just to get a bit of extra like aura, probably grace, and defiance into the build, so I have a little bit of defense at least somewhere. But as you can see, just a whole lot of charge travel at the moment, with a bit of crit as well, for the most part. Basically just traveling to pick up the other charges, but the most important thing for the other stuff is basically 10% chance to gain a frenzy charge when you hit your marked enemy. So we've got mark on hit with assassin mark, and this combined with Flicker Strike itself has 20% chance to gain a frenzy charge on hit, and then the chest has 10% chance to get a frenzy charge on hit, and then basically this precursor, which has 15% chance that you would gain frenzies up to your maximum number of charges, helps that essentially I'm trying to stack as many sources of like getting frenzies, and then one of those is bound to eventually just bounce you straight back up to full charges. And when you've got 30% chance for discharge to not consume charges, stacked with the discharge over here, another 10 qual means that we've got 40% chance to not remove our charges when popping off. And then yeah, I am using evolves in this build just to get even more charges, and then I've started stacking endurance charges as well. So with all that combined, we do basically have full charges almost all the time, even with Flicker consuming some and then discharge just going off constantly. Unfortunately, I did just come to the conclusion that there was essentially no way I'd outscale an Omniscience amulet, and I was going to build into that, but then I decided to pivot and leaned really heavily into Vol's Devotion, because I figured it could still work out, and so far it has. But I'm pretty sure, yeah, if you want to make a more serious version of this type of build, you just wouldn't care about endurance charges, you wouldn't go this far out, and you'd essentially just do Omniscience and stack as many like power and frenzy and generation through just a couple of you know, this side of the tree, maybe Trickster, Raider, Assassin, whatever. It'll still probably work out, but I really don't want to use the amulet in every build ever, and this still works, so went ahead and did it. So as you can see, CoC itself has Discharge, Elemental Penetration, and Power Charge on crit, and procs every 0.25 thanks to this threshold jewel. And like I said, the threshold also changes this craft over here. Let's have a look. Trigger this craft over here to not have an 8-second cooldown. It will instead have a 0.25 second cooldown, so consume a suffix on your weapon. And essentially the play there in the end is to then have a dagger that has like increased crit strikes or 40% more spell damage from this weapon craft, and then a few other things as well. So it will have a much higher yield in the end than a CoC, which is essentially just a bit of extra damage, but it helps you trigger the cast on crit, whereas this will still have that trigger, but then it can have a bunch of damage stats as well, especially an extra gem level or the 40% more damage. So once you have that going, then it's a lot more mana heavy, and at that stage, that's when I have to really fix mana. I'll probably do Vile Clarity or the mana 3 mana cost flask, Leviagnas, something like that. Currently, my mana costs aren't too bad. I've tried to fix them a bit. So 22 on Discharge, and the Eye of Winter is 27, and we can sustain that using the Trickster node here, and then Mana Flask, but mostly the Trickster node and some mana regen. But I did have a pick up a Watcher's Eye that has minus 10 cost for clarity, and then also a bit of crit from Zealotry, so this thing costs like 1 exalt. And as well as that, my Forbidden Flame, Forbidden Flesh at the moment is Saboteur. So the Saboteur, just Explosive Expert, gives a bit of crit multi, and penetration. So okay use for 2 jewels there, nothing too special, but pretty solid. What else? We've also got some Elevated Frenzy here. So essentially all I was trying to get on this glove is Elevated Frenzy. Rolled a glove for a bunch of times just to get Frenzy, and then use the Maven Orb to elevate it, and then smash it together with Unnerve, and this was the result. The Elevated Frenzies gives you an extra Frenzy, but also another 10% chance to gain up to your max Frenzies when you proc some. It also rolled Accuracy, which is decent. We do need some accuracy in the build, either from gloves, helm, ring, more on the passive tree, or some precision. So not too bad, but still otherwise the gloves do need some work. And there's a lot of glove choices actually. You can use Hand of High Templars with max frenzy, curse on hit, that sort of thing. You can use lots of different corrupted unique gloves like Surge Binders that can have max frenzy. Basically, I didn't have this elevated frenzy up until like, I don't know, 5 levels ago or something, so don't worry too much about this mod. The build still completely functions off of just one precursor. And I bought this thing for like, I don't know, 20C before I started this build. They weren't very expensive at all, just to have a nice frenzy mod in general. We then also got these boots in Aya's Epiphany with a max endurance charge. They were like, I don't know, 100C for a good roll, but max endurance is like 20C just with a bad roll. 25% chance that you would gain power charges, instead gain up to your maximum. So both power and frenzy are hopefully shooting straight to the top occasionally. Grabbed a max endurance ring, which costs 3x for the base, and honestly wasn't really worth it. With, you know, each additional charge past like 15 charges is not that much extra damage, right? And then you could have just bought a ring that does everything you need it to for a lot easier and cheaper. But I had to roll this bitch, and it just does some resists and some mana regen, and then a minus mana craft. Grabbed a Fractured Shield. I only just made this thing as well recently, so most of the video wouldn't be using it, I think. Fractured spell damage, which costs 100C, I think, and then just rolled it with Essences of Greed, I think, until I got a +1 something, and then prefix cannot be changed, Veil, the usual, and that's what we got. The chest, however, a bit of an interesting one. So basically you just grab the Frenzy on hit, and the attack crit is what I wanted most importantly. Awaken Rob together, and it hit nothing else. So it had 2 wasted prefixes basically, but it had 1 spare prefix. So from there, we did suffixes cannot be changed, crit reroll from Harvest, and then that guarantees it's going to have the 3 suffixes I want: attack, spell crit, and frenzy on hit. But when I did that, it also happened to just randomly hit a life roll and the Fizz of Chaos. So then I finished it off. But basically all we're looking for is those 3 good suffixes. You don't even need the spell crit really, but I could afford to do it, so I figured why not, because Discharge already has a very high amount of base crit, 7, so it's not that important. But yeah, it's pretty easy to have a chest with 3 good suffixes like that, and then just finish it off how you wanted. I was going to do a suffix cannot change and then Veil, but that wasn't necessary since we hit 2 good or decent, 1 good and then 1 decent prefix, so I just finished it off like that. But I think it's a fairly reliable chest that you can make just with the right currency and investment. Fairly reliable to get it to this type of stage, but very cool looking either way. And I think that's all I need to say for now. Just a few auras, nothing too special. We've got a Storm Brand. I'll probably attach it to a Power Charge on crit eventually as well. I did have it attached to a Power Charge on crit originally, but it just helps Frenzy generation for the most part because Power Charges aren't as stifled, but I will still attach it to a Power Charge on crit. And then I've got Mark on hit, Arcane Surge, Assassin Mark. That procs my Assassin Mark and Arcane Surge. And yeah, that's it for now, I think. Hopefully the build goes a little bit further. I don't expect it to do bossing very well, and I'll start using Cyclone as soon as I need to for bossing. But even then, it's going to be a bit of a flimsy character, I think, defenses and playstyle-wise. So we'll wait and see. But with the right tools to get started, it can definitely flicker around maps and be a bit of a dumb build. So, you know, if you want to copy that, by all means, get into it. Lastly, you will need a couple of dual sockets just for crit multi because the build's going to be very low on crit multi otherwise. But these that go all over the place aren't too expensive. You can get 3-stack crit multis for like 20C or something. Anyway, there it is. Cast on crit, flicker, discharge. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. Thank you very much for watching. See you next time.